Hi guys, the other day I made a video of the evolution of the electric guitar, and I watched a bit of that video the other day and I didn't expect to get any views for it, and it did over 1,000 views, which I totally didn't expect, which is not loads, but for my channel it's not too bad. And whilst I was looking at that, I remembered all of the guitarists of the time, and it seemed like each week there was a new guitarist to discover or find out about. And again, back then, you only saw a picture in a magazine, that was really about it. Or if you were lucky, you get a flexi disc or something. So you had to go and search out the music or records of these players. So in this video, I'm just going to quickly go through the evolution, as it was to me at that time, of all of these new, and at the time, revolutionary electric guitar players. After Eddie Van Halen was really sort of recognised and acknowledged, I suppose, tapping was the sort of thing everybody was doing, and it started to become a bit of a cliche. But around this time, there was an English television programme called The Tube, and there was this guy on there called Stanley Jordan, and he started playing with these jazz standards with this 8-finger tapping. And nowadays that might seem quite normal, but back then that was like, we were literally watching it at the telly like this. We were just amazed, and I'd never seen anything like that before. And it wasn't just the fact he was doing some sort of guitar trick or gimmick, but he's actually playing jazz standards. I remember he played Eleanor Rigby, and yeah, it was just like, wow, how, you know, because there was like counterpoint and solos and chords and really fast jazz lines. And it was really, really exciting at the time. And I can remember, I think it was that weekend, I went out and bought The Magic Touch, his album. Yeah, and I was blown away by that. And that was one of the really first changes for me anyway in the evolution of guitar. After the Stanley Jordan thing, I can remember there was David Lee Roth, and he had this new hot guitarist at the time, and that guy was Steve Vai. And of course you didn't know he was really, you just saw him in the videos, because David Lee Roth was very, very good at making videos back then. So if you watch the chart show or something, you see these amazing videos, and they always seem to capture the guitarists really well. But at the time, that was high, the visual was, you know, was highly inspirational. And you look at this and you think, wow, these guitar players, what are they doing now? And I can remember Steve Vai being the main one. And I had a guitar magazine at the time. I think it might have been a British one, probably the only decent British one at that time. And he had a guitar with 2 necks here and 1 neck here. And back then that was like, I mean, it still looks pretty amazing now, but back then that was like, wow, that was like, how's he going to play this one, you know, and this one at the same time, you know. I mean, Michelangelo Batio later came along with like 4 guitar necks, and I think he did it before Steve Vai as well. But I hadn't heard of Michelangelo Batio at that time, because you might see a picture in a magazine, but unless you had access to the records, you just didn't know who any of these people, you know, how they really sounded. You didn't know how they sounded at all. But Steve Vai, yeah, I can remember him being one of the first ones to really stand out. Not long after Steve Vai, I bought an album, Marching Out. I think it was Yngwie Malmsteen's first sort of album as the rising force, or Yngwie Malmsteen. You know, as him as a solo artist, or him as the main guy in the group. And Marching Out back then, I think the solo was on The Disciples of Hell, but the solo on there was really, really good. It was these arpeggios, and it was the way that it was played. It wasn't so much just the playing, it's more the way it was played. And it was very much, ironically, it was against the development or the evolution of the electric guitar as it was evolving with these super strats. It's sort of going the opposite way with these traditional strats. But at the same time, it was completely nothing like you had heard before. It was actually extremely new. I don't know what it was, but at the time I had one of these Amstrad record players that you had like this, and it was upside down. And instead of putting the record on like this, you put it on like this. And for some reason, the speakers on it, the sound of Yngwie's guitar really jumped out of the speakers. I can still hear it to this day. It's like, and it sounded utterly, totally amazing. Never heard anything like it before at the time. It was really, really new. You know, it's this neoclassical metal. And I can remember the first time hearing that coming out of the speakers. And I can still get the feeling of it now. It wasn't just the fact that the music was really new or great. It's the fact that it was just like, you could feel it coming out, the guitar sound. It was quite bassy. The Stratocaster sound had that sort of blah, 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 sort of sound. That was very new, and I can remember listening to I'm a Viking was another really good guitar solo on that as well. But the Disciples of Hell solo was absolutely fantastic. Also, there's a nice bit of acoustic playing on there. But that was an amazing album. And I went to see him not long after that, actually. Went to see him live, and yeah, he's very, very good. And that was a huge change at that time. That really, even nowadays, people still seem to go back to that for reference. When you hear all these guitar guys nowadays, they're all kind of doing the Yngwie Malmsteen, you know, thing still. A lot of people slag him off, but a lot of people copy that still. Because it's so, in its day, it was so original, and it was, you know, taking classical ideas to the electric guitar was such a great idea. It was a really, really unique idea back then. Another guy around this time I can remember was, you always see him in these adverts for pickups, DiMarzio pickups. And there's just a picture of him, generally wearing sunglasses, I think. And I didn't know anything about him. I think he was Steve Vai's guitar teacher or something. And again, you couldn't hear anything unless you bought a record. I luckily went into Our Price Records and managed to get Not of This Earth. And I can remember putting that record on, and it was just such a great record. Because again, that sort of went against the neoclassical style of rock music. And again, that was Joe Satriani. The reason he was so successful, or is so successful, but especially at that time, was that he's highly original, and he stood out massively from all of the others that were playing. And I can remember listening to The Enigmatic and thinking to myself, wow, this is completely and utterly insane. But it was very inspirational at the same time. And also what was great was that he had this amazing clean guitar sound for the chords. It's a very well made record, that. It's a very lovely made record. And the song, there's a sort of clarity to it. There's a lot on there, but at the same time there isn't a lot on there. There's this sort of sparseness, but there isn't. It's a very odd thing, but there's a real clarity to it. It just came out really well, that album, I think. Especially at that time, because I don't think he made it with very much money. I think it was done quite cheaply. Also, Joe Satriani stood out because he was a good composer, a really good composer. And you knew that he was going to, you know, become really, really successful. Although I have to say, at that time, you didn't know that Joe Satriani was going to become as big as he did. You didn't know that Steve Vai was going to become, you know, a sort of household name in his own right, you know, as it were back then. Because they were just sort of starting out, really. They were just sort of coming to prominence. It wasn't that big a deal. But it was if you were a guitar player or a guitar nerd like myself, a guitar geek, guitar obsessive, you know. Also around that time, another great guitar player, I bought an album. It was, what was it? It was one of Mike Varney's. Mike Varney was this guy who used to get all these guitarists to send their demos into the magazine. Guitar player, and sometimes he'd sign some of them, and also he'd go out looking for other guitarists, and he'd sign all of these people like Paul Gilbert and all of this lot. The star player though on this album, both as a musician, a performer, or solos, or whatever you want to call it, but mainly as a composer, was Jason Becker with this incredible composition called Altitudes. Luckily for me at that time, I would buy the guitar magazines, and with Guitar Player especially, you would get these flexi discs. And at the time, I can remember they were talking about this new guy that was playing this sort of blues shred type music. And luckily they put a flexi disc in the magazine, and that was Greg Howe. That was the first time I'd ever heard him, because you just see these paragraphs written about him. You don't know how they're going to sound when you know people are talking or writing about someone. And I can remember hearing that for the first time. That was like really new again, because it had the shred thing and this sort of neoclassical thing slightly, but it's all blues kind of licks, kind of played at a very fast tempo. And that was amazing. I can remember the morning I got that flexi disc and listening to it and going, wow, it was really utterly incredible. Another guy as well, they had a flexi disc with, and that was Frank Gambale. Again, he wasn't well known at the time. He's just sort of really starting out. It wasn't a household name or anything. It's just some guy, you know, just another guy coming along. I wasn't a great fan of Frank Gambale's playing, I have to admit, but at the same time, it was new. It was, you know, it was fun. It was really, really exciting. By the time we got to 1989, most of these guitarists had started to make their mark, and they were, you know, successful in their own right. And it was amazing seeing this evolution of guitar from the guitar that I knew, because I started off with this sort of Hendrix stuff, and then going right through this kind of Van Halen, Stanley Jordan, Yngwie Malmsteen, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Jason Becker, and Frank Gambale, and all of these players, and the guitar evolving and changing, and it just built and built and built. But by the time it got to about 1989, and the guitar then had, I suppose, its next evolution, or non-evolution, I suppose, where it sort of went into the opposite with the sort of coming of grunge music, I suppose. And it was funny because it had gone from this very, very kind of over-the-top guitar world that was evolving and very, very colourful to this very kind of almost anti-guitar world, or anti-guitar solos with this sort of grunge music. And then it seemed to die out for a long, long time, the shred music, and people seemed to really hate it as well. And that's how it felt. I mean, I'm not a great fan of shred music now. I can listen to Joe Satriani or Jason Becker or something. I'm not a great fan of it now, but because it just seems so normal. It's quite cliched now. At the time, it was very, very new. And the guitar, the evolving way of the guitar was amazing. Seeing these different instruments and these super strats and all of this sort of thing. It was, and the colours and the pickups and the whammy bars, tremolo bars. It was, you know, fascinating. But by the time sort of grunge took hold of everything, it all sort of changed. And that was it, really. Although now, of course, it's sort of come back massively again, really, I suppose. But you have 8-string guitars now and this sort of thing, you know, and 24 guitar strings or whatever, you know. But what you hear now doesn't ever seem to be new like it was back then. It does, you know, somebody could be really good at it, but it's impossible to hear it, you know, in that kind of revolutionary way that it was. It was like before, you'd hear something, again, Jason Becker Altitude is a very good example, where if you heard that, you would actually be like, wow, that really simply is good. Even if you don't like electric guitar or rock music, that is actually good. That's actually something that you can't help but listen to. You can't avoid it. You can't, how can you dislike it? It is so good. But nowadays, like I say, I'm not complaining, but I'm just saying that nowadays the newness of it, the originality is just not there. And probably that's why I'm making these videos, because it takes me back. When I go back, it takes me back to that point of hearing things for the first time, and that point of inspiration where music, I mean, having said that, when I was younger, music was everything. There wasn't computer games or internet like there is now. I mean, there was computer games, but not like, you know, online, and no internet. But it was so, music was so important, and everything was so new, and everything in music was so powerful and inspirational. So this is really just looking back at that era and remembering all of these great guitarists that evolved along with the evolution of the instrument. Anyway, if this video was of any use to you, then please smash that subscribe button, because that keeps the channel going. Smash the like button. That really helps me with the algorithm. Click the notification button if you like the video, and write a comment if you want. And I'll see you all in the next video. And thank you for watching.